All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or if you're in Anna's case, good evening, as it's currently 9:20 Berlin time. But thank you for joining us today on the first ever Dome Dialogues live stream. We're sending out across the world via Zoom and YouTube and Facebook Live. So if you're on any of those platforms, feel free to send us some questions and interact with us today. My name's Mike McCall. I'm the founder of Dome Dialogues, longtime planetarian, super big space nerd. And in this very momentous day, 27th of May, 2020, we have the opportunity to watch the first crewed mission from American soil since 2011. And thought about trying to put something that would be something together that would be great for education, just kind of going over a lot of the things that are currently at play now with this mission. And I could think of no one else better than fellow space nerd and probably the biggest space nerd I know in the entire world, Anna Green, who is she works at the Stiftung Planetarium Foundation in Berlin, series of large planetariums there in the city, and is one of the most proficient space exploration experts that I know of in the world. And so does the US Embassy in Berlin. They say that as well. So, Anna, how excited are you today to see this happen?
I'm pumped. I mean, I would stay up all night if this was a later launch in the United States. I would wait an alarm, or I would want to see this. I had originally had plans to be there for some of these first launches, but think it was work out quite that way. But I'm thrilled I can still stream it. So
Fantastic. Yeah. So we've got questions coming in from all different sides, and one of the things we wanted to do a little bit differently was not only to bring you the live streams, but bring you a little bit of information and context behind that. So what we're going to do, and hopefully this will work perfectly. This is the first time, of course, we've done any of this, but we're going to go on ahead and share some information here. So hopefully this will work perfectly. That's me on the second camera. So hey, looking really good there. That's a orange screen for those of you at home. That's a blank screen, a blue screen, and then eventually we're going to get to what we really want, which is our live stream screen. And so we've got a number of live streams working with us today. NASA, SpaceX, the Mission Control live stream. And on the left side of the screen, you'll see a series of tweets. We've got a selected group of space experts on the internet. We'd like to have them on board as well, kind of helping us through this. So you can see here with the NASA live stream, we're looking at the Falcon 9 on the launch pad getting ready. Of course, the big problem today has been weather. It is Florida in the spring, which means that your chance of having a major thunderstorm at any one time is pretty much 100%. So as it's going right now, we're just going to have a good time this afternoon, kind of kick back and do a little bit about this. But kind of given Anna's expertise, you were there in 2011 at the Cape for STS-135, the last crewed mission from American soil. Comparing what you were experiencing in 2011 and now, of course, what we have here in 2020, it kind of give us a sense of how important all of this feels to you right now.
I mean, it's interesting because I know in 2011, a lot of what I heard and a lot of the questions I got at work was, oh yeah, so NASA's closing, or there's not a NASA anymore. And it was hard to explain to people that no, NASA does lots of things. And this is just the end of this program. We're going to be moving on to the next. There was actually a gap of time between Apollo and the shuttle as well. It's just that a lot of people don't remember that. And it was a little bit shorter than this was, I believe. Yeah, it was a bit shorter. But yeah, that just gives us a nice dramatic lead up to what's happening today. But it's really important. The cost of sending Americans on the Soyuz is, pun very much intended, astronomical. It's 80 million a seat. So this will be quite the cost savings for us being able to send our own astronauts into space ourselves and from American soil, which was always the plan. The plan has always been that America will launch from their own soil again. But with administration changes and technology changes and such, it was just always a question of who will be first, because NASA, of course, is doing their crewed Orion capsule. Boeing, of course, and SpaceX, of course, with Dragon. And so there's kind of a question of who's gonna be ready to go first. And they've all been testing and they've all been doing great. Here and there, of course, but SpaceX was the one that made it, and we're here today. And I'm super excited to see this. And like I said, I think it's just super important for not just the United States, but in general for space exploration. It's given us more options.
Stage 1, RP1 bleed started.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it really is. I think in a really big way. We went from 2011. It's 40 years at that point of American space flight that was NASA and NASA alone. Still a lot of the partnerships that we would get with the different companies, the different defense contractors that would be making all of the various components and the spacecraft. But to go from NASA being the center of it all, and it's mission control in Houston, to now we're looking at a brave new world where there's a private company, owned by a billionaire with all of his eccentricities to boot, who is working alongside one of the more well-respected federal agencies that there is, and says, hey, we're going to put people into space. For I think the future here, when we look forward past even today, big issue. It's this is a big deal, and of course we've got we've got people going to the space station from American soil. Where do you see this this combination between NASA and SpaceX, and NASA and Boeing, and even when we get to things like Jeff Bezos and New Glenn and things like that sort? How different does the future of crewed exploration look like compared to something, of course, that you're a great expert in, the last 50 something years of manned and now crewed exploration of space?
So one of the biggest differences, of course, which unfortunately is not being reflected today, is the fact that it's not just men going into space, not just white male test pilots going into space. And I mean, nothing against them, because they clearly paved the way and they were fabulous with what they did. And some of them made the ultimate sacrifice for the space program. Also, we're a lot more knowledgeable. If you go back to Project Mercury, they literally were kind of making it up as they went along. There'd never been a mission control before. How do you build one? And you figure it out, how should the capsule look? And over 60 years of space flight, we've been able to hone in on that, and not just NASA, but these commercial space crews as well. And I think it's fabulous that we're spreading out like that. And a lot of times people also, I think that NASA's just not doing anything anymore because we're using the commercial crews and these companies. But NASA never built their own spacecraft. There's always been a different company involved that's been contracted. So with Mercury and Gemini, it was McDonnell Aircraft Corporation. With Apollo, it was North American Aviation. And it's been that way since the beginning. So you can kind of just think of it that way. The difference here, though, is that SpaceX can also work on its own agenda as well. Prior to that, the other companies were completely under NASA's agenda. SpaceX works with NASA as well as a team, but they can do things like send Tom Cruise into space to film a movie, which I call St. Louis my hometown, and it's part of the Show Me State, and that's because we believe things when we see them. So
Yeah.
I'm still working out kind of how I feel entirely about that, and I worry a little bit personally that it's kind of a stunt like what happened in 1986 with the Teacher in Space program, and hopefully it won't have the same ending that Challenger did. I think that's a very dangerous way to go, but that does go to show that this is something that we're looking at now. This is the future of spaceflight, and people probably moving forward are going to be able to pay for seats to go into space. And we're looking at maybe having that space tourism coming up, and all these things that in the 50s, you know, the shiny silver spacesuits and everything that you would have seen at Tomorrowland at Disneyland when it first opened. All these ideas of space tourism, those aren't far-fetched anymore because of the commercial spaceflight program.
Yeah. One of the things that kind of in putting together some of the research for today and looking at how differently we view spaceflight, we've had, I think it's 22 crew that have perished on a mission before. And of course, the two most famous of those were Challenger in '86 and then Columbia in the early 2000s. And NASA, I think, set in the original specifications for commercial crew that the calculated loss of crew was supposed to be better than 1 in 270. So in 270 launches, only one should have
catastrophic
the anomaly, in the great parlance of NASA. And SpaceX has come back and said, well, looking at everything that they're in for this mission, their calculated loss of crew is 1 in 276. And so it's just this idea that we're willing to put, we're definitely willing to put a lot more emphasis on the exploration, that we're willing to maybe take a few more risks to do something like this than we would ever do. If the chance that you were going to die in a car crash today was 1 in 270, you'd be really, really scared getting into that car. And yet, we think about whether it's this or the shuttle missions, or, especially in the 1960s with Mercury and Gemini and Apollo, we did everything possible that we could to get rid of those problems and try to mitigate as many of those disasters as we could. But we're still in that point of like, this is some scary stuff, and as exciting as it is, and as amazing a feat as it is for any country to put people into orbit, there's a nice patriotism, of course, that comes with it. It's still really scary stuff. This is dangerous work. I guess if going to space was easy, then everybody would do it, and we're clearly not at that point. So what I think we want to do, take a little bit of time, is give an overview of the Space Coast. We're always talking about Kennedy Space Center and the different launch pads. And for people who don't live in Central Florida, haven't lived in Central Florida, some of this seems kind of foreign, and we wanted to give everybody a little bit of context. So we're going to jump over real quick to take a view of Google Earth and kind of navigate our way through the Space Coast. And this is an area that both Anna and I have spent a lot of time in. I grew up in Central Florida. Anna spent a lot of time on the coast to see missions. And kind of give you an idea of where we are today and where both NASA and SpaceX have been utilizing their facilities moving forward. So, Anna, I'm gonna kind of turn this over to you a little bit. Essentially, just kind of I'll walk us through a couple of the places, and you give us sort of the importance here. But I think if we're going to start with anything, kind of give context for today, let's go to the big one. Let's fly into LC-39A. Here on the center of the screen. All right, Anna, are you there?
I am here.
Oh,
Am I
okay.
okay.
You're good to go. So now we're at the launch pads. Can you give us a little history of the LCs, the launch complexes, specifically here in the northern part of the Space Coast, 39A and 39B, and sort of their importance?
Sure. So 39A and B were used all throughout the entirety of the shuttle program. 39A was the main pad. More often, I feel, after the unfortunate tragedy of Columbia, when it was required to always have two shuttles on the pad. If something wrong with the launch, there could be a rescue from another shuttle, which was not an option with Columbia, had they even know there had been damage. So both of those pads were used throughout the entire 30 years of the shuttle program. And 39A was the historic pad for the Apollo program. So this launch pad has gone through just changes over the years. It had to be completely revamped for the shuttle program. Space shuttle was much smaller than a Saturn V rocket, and then it was again revamped to be able to host rocket launches, as well as hopefully in the future the space launch. So really been quite the historic. Everybody from Jim Lovell
was completed. All systems are proceeding. We're monitoring the
launch complex.
We're also looking at.
I think we maybe lost you a little bit on that last part. Could you repeat maybe like the last 10 seconds of what you said?
8 minutes, 30 seconds.
I said that it's really historic. All of the Apollo astronauts, basically from Apollo 8 on. So Jim, and then of course the big ones, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins. History from that site. That's us to the moon.
Absolutely. And so just want to let everybody know that as we're watching the tweets and the feeds come in, that we are currently a go for launch from inside of the capsule, although there is still some outstanding weather issues. Just up to a few minutes ago, there was we were red on the launch pad, which would be a no-go for launch, primarily due to rain and lightning. So as we track the weather, we're going to continue to do that, but we are currently just a little bit under an hour until the launch of Demo-2. So really excited about that. So as Anna said, these are our launch pads that have had a very storied history. The 39A, what we see here, is the primary SpaceX portal for their flights with NASA and for the future of their crewed flights. One of the more important places that's been built is here inside of that circle. This is the SpaceX horizontal integration facility. If you've seen any of the really impressive pictures from, say, the first Falcon Heavy launch back in the beginning of 2018, you may have seen some shots where the building itself was up in front with the rocket going off in the back, and that's where most of the work for the rockets, both pre and post launch, especially when we get the boosters returned to Earth, a lot of the work's going to go there inside the HIF, the horizontal integration facility. One of the throwbacks to NASA's heyday in the 60s, and then of course through the shuttle system, the shuttle program, is there's a trackway that takes you from both of the LC-39s, both A and B, to one of the more impressive buildings on the face of the Earth. And that, of course, is the Vehicle Assembly Building. Anna, have you had the opportunity to take a tour of the VAB?
I'm smirking because no, I have not. And the reason I did not was because of the government shutdown. So the last time that I was in Florida working with you and some of the very lovely people that we're seeing on Twitter right now, like Lauren and Emily, I did go over to Kennedy. We were working on at my last institution that I worked at in St. Louis. We were working on preparing for the Destination Moon exhibit, and so I went to Kennedy to kind of look at some of their stuff. And going around with one of their exhibit guys, he even said like, "Oh, have you ever been in the VAB? I'll take you on the roof." Unfortunately, we can't do that today because it's too last second. And had we had the original day that we had planned to meet, which was the day before when everything was shut down, I would have been able to go. So he promised the next time that I'm in town, I'll get to go up to the roof of the VAB, which I'm pretty sure will be one of the biggest highlights of my life. So
I could definitely see that. VAB, of course, was by volume is one of the largest buildings on the planet, and sort of gives a little bit of a dichotomy between the way that SpaceX and some of the other companies have decided to go about working their rockets, and what NASA did, of course, in that the VAB was built to hold in its entirety the Saturn V, the largest rocket that has yet been launched, and of course, continued on through into the 80s, 90s, and 2000s as the kind of the setup area for the shuttles. And so if you follow along the paths, you can see here from space is one of the crawlers. And so you of course put the shuttle or the Saturn V and its launch apparatus on top of these, and I think they were 1/10 of a mile per hour. It was something like
it was ridiculously slow. But also when you have, a 363 foot tall rocket on something that's moving, I'd want it to go pretty slow too.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this is, it's the beauty of the fact that you have, when we finished the shuttle program, a shuttle launch was, depending on, of course, who you talk to and what the mission would have been about, $1 to $3 billion a launch, and to have one of these crawlers moving this incredibly delicate piece of equipment. I mean, it's a shuttle; it's going into space, but you don't want this thing to fall over. And then, of course, have it do that in all sorts of Florida weather, wind, rain, the severe thunderstorms that just kind of pop up and disappear in 10 minutes. But along the several mile track, at which point you could go to either the northernmost 39B or the southern 39A. And you can see that the horizontal facility for SpaceX is built directly on that pathway. And so as they roll out the rockets, they're using some of the infrastructure that existed before for the NASA missions. But that's the north end of what we would consider the Space Coast. The other real big thing here would be the shuttle landing facility. It's one of the largest runways in the United States. It's like 17,000 feet paved. And all kinds of fun stories. One of the big things is that it's in the middle of a swamp in eastern Florida. And so one of the issues they've long had on the strip are alligators. And you've got to clear the strip of alligators before you could have a shuttle mission land. Not an issue, I guess, that they would have out at Edwards. I doubt there's any alligators in the middle of the California desert, but
maybe rattlesnakes.
Yeah. A rattlesnake that gets run over by a space shuttle is not going to have a great time. An alligator could probably cause some major damage, and so all the Floridians are aware of just how dangerous they can be. But in the southern half of the Space Coast, you've got Kennedy Space Center to the north and sort of that entity, and to the south is the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. And the Air Force Station, as you sort of move down the east coast of Florida, is like moving back in time in some ways. It's this line, almost continuous line of of old launch sites. Some that date, of course, all the way back to the beginning of the Mercury program, and some that are still in use today. The three ones that are really of most importance are 41, 40, and 37. These are going to be space launch complexes. And 41 and 40 in particular, still in use quite a bit with United Launch Alliance. They sent up the Deltas and the Atlas rockets. But 40 and 41 also have a very important place in Anna's heart.
Actually, sorry, I hate doing the actually thing.
Oh, no, actually away.
So I know where you're going with this. They're actually earlier numbers, the launch sites that you're thinking of. So,
Gotcha.
So my favorite program was Project Gemini. Everybody kind of forgets about Gemini, but without it, we never would have gotten to the moon. And that was Launch Complex 19. And then the Atlas complexes of Project Mercury were Launch Complex 14. And of course, the first two flew from Launch Complex 5-6. So that's where Shepard and Grissom launched from.
And those, of course, are near the southern tip here.
And they're so tiny. They're
they
so
really
tiny.
Are. It's we can zoom in on them and give you an idea, but it's an area where you might have an area in the center that would have been where you'd have your rocket set up, and then like a corridor that leads you to a bunker, and you kind of sit in the bunker and you've got all of the controls and you watch this thing fly up. And Mercury Redstone, height wise, I didn't break 100 feet, I don't think, right?
I cannot remember. You got me there. I cannot remember off the top of my head, but it was a baby by comparison. It was tiny. I mean, it couldn't even put us in orbit. It was too small. It could only do the suborbital ballistic flights, which got us into space. So there's no denying it was important. The reason we went with it to begin with was, and not just the Atlas, which was what got us into space, is because the Atlas had this nasty little habit of every 2 out of 3 launches, it would blow up on the pad. And that's not something you want to, put life on top of whether it be chimp or human. So that's why that got pushed back a little longer.
And because of the sort of these are still, of course, there for a long time. You could take a bus tour through the application.
And I highly recommend when things are back to tourism normal, I highly recommend that bus tour. It was one of the most fascinating things that I have. If you are a space nerd, it needs to be on your bucket list, hands down.
Oh, absolutely. And there are still some of these older launch sites in use, except that they're no longer used for launching. What I believe used to be Launch Complex 13 is now landing zones 1 and 2 for SpaceX. And so, of course, one of the big important breakthroughs in the Falcon rocket is reusability. And of course, that's going to be the name of the game moving forward. But the fact that you have the boosters be able to return again and again. So if they land on soil, it's going to be here at LZ1 or LZ2. And then, of course, if they're and I it's out there, but I always forget the name of the drop ship for SpaceX. The something about it loving you. Yeah. But
well, of course, I still love you. Thanks, Scott.
Yes, and thank you. And so one of the things you'll see is as we're here looking at the Space Coast, we are seeing a retraction of the crew arm, and so now we have separated even more of the launch apparatus from the rocket. It's a big deal. Of course, the gantry, so iconic for Saturn V, so iconic for the space shuttle. It's a big deal, and you can follow along there. People are really excited about this, and to be able to see this happen in a new way. By the end of the shuttle program, it was almost like old hat. It's like, oh yeah, we can put people in space anytime we want. It's no big deal. And now that we've had these almost a decade between fights from American soil, this is
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, interrupt away again.
I was gonna say, yeah, that is one of the nice things too about this, is it's gotten Americans and a good chunk of the world, for that matter, it's gotten all of us reignited in our interest in spaceflight. I was a big Simpsons fan growing up, and I always remember one episode that really irked me, and it's the episode where Homer goes into space, and it starts out and he's trying to like flip through channels, and Bart walks in and goes, "No, Dad, it's another boring space shuttle launch." And then the batteries fall out of the remote, and they like desperately run to unplug the TV so they don't have to watch it, because it was just that normal that people stopped paying attention. But now it's become more of a hopefully not a novelty. I really hope it's something that people can still enjoy and get excited about as we move forward. And I think too, with the competition, you know, we still have to see the Starliner launch. And so, you know, that'll bring another exciting element to it. And eventually we'll see Orion with a crew inside. Its test launch went very, very well, but that was a few years ago. And the SLS still needs to do its test launch. And so there's some really fun milestones coming up within the crewed spaceflight program. I'm so used to talking about the before time.
Well, and that's actually a really good segue and opportunity for us to discuss this. We're just going to kind of turn this over to the NASA live stream, so you get some nice views in the background. But a couple of years ago, of course, NASA changed their style guide to reflect the difference between manned and crewed, without getting rid of the history of manned spaceflight as we know it. So when you're discussing something like the Gemini program, the Apollo program, how does NASA prefer us to refer to those programs? As crewed retroactive, or is it we have?
It's the manned spaceflight program, because that's what it was. And basically you use that term until you hit the shuttle program. When we first had women enter the program. But yeah, up through Apollo Soyuz test project in 75, I mean, it was only men. And at the time, I'm sure they were thinking of it as being the humankind aspect of it, but it was both literally and figuratively the manned spaceflight program. So, and NASA does say in their style guide that they do want you to phrase it that way.
Mm-hmm. But of course, now we have a fully gender integrated astronaut corps, and it is Crew Dragon. It's not Man Dragon. So at the very least, Correct. It's like right there in the title.
Yep.
And so today, of course, and speaking of crew, we've got 2 astronauts on board today. First time we've had a 2 astronaut flight since STS-4, which I think was back in 1981 or 1982. And then, of course, before that was the Gemini program, which, the twins would make sense. But we've got Bob Behnken, Doug Hurley are on board. Hurley pilot, Behnken's going to be what they're calling the Joint Operations Commander, and both of them long time ties to NASA, and in particular, one very, very important connection for you, Anna, to STS-135, to the final shuttle mission. So I'll let you talk about that for a bit.
So I actually sneak two ties in here. So one, of course, is that Doug Hurley was on that last STS-135 launch, and I was super excited to be able to go down and see that. I applied to the lottery to win the tickets for the class. After feeling that that's dumb. This is the last time a shuttle is ever going to launch, and I'm going to see it. So I was going to find a hotel wherever I could, and I was going to do what I needed to do to make it happen. Found a hotel in Orlando, and then we drove down to Cocoa Beach to the hostel lodge where we stayed the night, and tried to not be caught by the security driving around. And then in the morning, we actually went down to the beach on the Banana River and got just a beautiful, beautiful sight of that. And so that was phenomenal to see. What I find cool is, so Doug Hurley ended the shuttle program. He's in the commercial space program. But he's also programmed with a astronaut, which is, and he is starting this program with another St. Louis, Bob Bank in St. Anne, which is a sub. So both Sandy and Bob Bank and Call. It makes me happy that all over those, I have my little ties back home, but yeah, so looking forward to it. And another thing that's cool too is these friends, they're 20 something years. They came in the same astronaut class. Would you say that they found their wives because their wives were also in. They joke that NASA wives for them. So they were in.
So it's, you know, one of the things we've been seeing sort of the whole time here is that family aspect and how much they are connected to NASA. This isn't, you know, this is not SpaceX plucking two brand new people, two brand new people and putting them in a spaceship for the first time. These are people that we know that in this situation, in this environment, as stressful as it is, are going to be able to do their jobs.
And both of the commercial spaceflight contenders, both Boeing and SpaceX, there were 4 astronauts selected from NASA to work with those companies, and 2 went to SpaceX and 2 went to Boeing. Boeing has one of my favorite astronauts, actually, which is Sunny Williams. So looking forward to her launch as well.
Oh yeah. And so just to give everybody a quick update, if you're not following along with the tweets and things, we are in the process of fueling, and we have armed the escape system for the Dragon capsule. And so this is a relatively new thing in terms of having a full propellant load with astronauts at the very top of this. And of course, we're looking at a very different sort of launch system than what we're used to from the shuttle program. Of course, the shuttle program, you had the 2 solid rocket boosters, you had the main tank, and then of course the smaller thrusters on the back of the shuttle. But this was designed to launch vertically and then come back to Earth as a glider, essentially. And now we're sort of going back in time here with the function and design of Crew Dragon, of Starliner, for most of the companies. So when we talk about sort of Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, the recovery of bringing these astronauts back to Earth, trying to pinpoint a location somewhere in the middle of an ocean that we can go get them. It kind of explain to us, you know, it's on the one hand, it's not as precise and easy, I guess, as it would be to get a shuttle land on the same place every single time, and your people can walk out and things are relatively straightforward, versus something where why this sort of capsule design, why this sort of capsule recovery, why we're going back to it after 40 years essentially. What makes it work so well for us?
Well, the nice thing is the ability, if there's some kind of issue, you don't have to be spot on. The oceans are pretty darn big. And so that really does come in handy. And also, as well, if there's a weather issue and you can't land in the Atlantic, you can go land in the Pacific. And this came into play in a few of the earlier missions. Apollo 13, of course, is one. If you've seen the movie, you probably remember them talking about a typhoon warning in their landing zone and them joking about, well, not joking, but probably very seriously saying, yeah, only if their luck changes will they miss that. So, that enables you to pick another landing site either nearby or in a different ocean, depending on, you know, what your trajectory enables you to do. I do know, at least with Orion, from the beginning, the idea was that it should also be able to land on the land like the Soyuz does.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, if I was flying in one, I would much rather land in the ocean than on the ground. And I realize there's shock absorbers and such for the Soyuz, but that just, and I also know if you're going too fast and hitting water, it's basically like hitting concrete. But there's something in my mind that makes you think that, you know, landing on water is gentler than landing on land. But in general, it's a lot. It's a lot easier if there's an issue to land in the ocean, and especially now with the tracking is vastly improved since the beginning of the programs. It's a lot easier to find them, get to them, and pick them up. But even in the beginning, Scott Carpenter's Mercury flight was his first and only flight. He kind of got distracted with some things and used up all his fuel pitching around out in space and sightseeing a little bit. And so when he landed, he was severely off course. He was one of the most off course landings of of all of those early programs.
So kind of the closest thing to an astronaut joyride at this point?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And they found him. I mean, they found him eventually, and he was quite a ways off course, and he was just hanging out, eating a candy bar, waiting for him to pick him up. So, I mean, he had no doubt in his mind he was going to get found. It was just a matter of time.
All right. Well, we're gonna insert some reality into this. We are currently looking at weather trending the wrong way. So we may be doing all of this and still end up with red range conditions, which would mean a no launch at some point in the near future. But as I wouldn't say a native Floridian, but as a mostly Floridian. Now, of course, Pennsylvania, so as far from Florida as I can get on the East Coast, pretty much. It's Florida weather. If you're not used to it, it can be sunny at 4 o'clock. It can be raining at 4:05. You could have a tornado at 4:08, and then it'll be cleared about 4:11. And that's just sort of everyday life in Florida. And so what you're seeing now on the webcast, the live streams, that's par for the course here. In Central Florida here in what is its summertime. So we're 30 minutes left. We are, you can see some of the tweets here. It's down to the wire and people are getting a little bit of agita from all of this. Anna, you've got a lot of experience with human spaceflight, you know, as an expert rather than not actually going into space. For you, this is it's an extremely important flight. It's not, in a way, it's not the first flight to the moon. It is a flight from American soil. It's important, but it's not, maybe say the most important mission we've ever had from the Space Coast. Where do you see this in sort of the bigger context of spaceflight history, where we're going to look at this and say, oh, this was a good stepping stone, or that this really was the moment that the entire sort of the entire future of American crewed spaceflight changed?
Well, I mean, any point in the human spaceflight history that you would look at, and it was, a point that changed the course of the program or the history of the program, each one of those you could also look back and call a stepping stone as well. I mean, whether it be orbiting the first time, or the first time we did a spacewalk, or the first time we actually beat the Soviets at something and were able to achieve rendezvous and docking. All of those were huge achievements that enabled us to move forward on our way to the moon. But, you would look back today and say, oh yeah, that was just a stepping stone of Gemini or Mercury or whatever it may be. So I think that this could easily change how we know spaceflight, human spaceflight. But also, I mean, it could very easily also be considered a stepping stone. I mean, this is just the beginning. Where could we possibly go from here? This seems like there's no limit. So,
well, it seems like, you know, where we're going to go.
Well, aside from the weather seems to be a pretty big limit potentially right now. But
yeah, and a fine reminder from Lauren Grush, who is a reporter for The Verge, based out of New York. Lauren's one of the Anna and I have both met her. We both were able to work with her a couple of years ago on a women in STEM panel. Wonderful person. Brings up a very important point. This is an instantaneous launch window. And so what SpaceX is trying to do is launch us at 4:33 and 33 seconds Eastern Daylight Time, which means that if there is any point in this countdown where we have a hold, we will have to scrub the launch and reassess for Saturday. It's scrubbing a launch. Kind of everybody's experienced it, you know, no matter how, you know, how many people have gone to the Space Coast expecting a launch, and then, you know, the shuttle mission gets pushed back again and again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a couple of very, very close calls on aborts before, especially in the shuttle days. Sort of, what was the level of like, what was the tolerance for no go or go on some of these launches?
It got stricter as the years went on. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes a tragedy to teach us a lesson. And that goes all the way back to Apollo with the fire in Apollo 1. They had what they called go fever, and they just wanted to reach their goal before the end of the decade. And nobody said, stop, something's not right. We need to fix it. And then if you go back and you look at Challenger and what happened there, I mean, they were warned. They were warned ahead of time that the O-rings could potentially not function the way they were supposed to under the temperature changes. And again, I would call that go fever. They didn't want to scrub the mission again and postpone the launch. And so they did it anyway. And then, you know, you find, okay, well, that was an extremely horrific way to learn a lesson. But since then, you know, the checks and the calls for go, no go have gotten a lot stricter. And I know one of the women that I went to watch the final launch with, she had actually been down there previously. Her honeymoon was to go see STS-134 launch when it was supposed to be the last one. And of course it scrubbed. So their honeymoon, they didn't actually ever get to see the launch, and she thought she was going to never get to see one. So she was happy to see the last one. But and I know a couple other people who went multiple times for STS-134 and never got to see it launch. Or something's not quite working the way it's supposed to. I mean, space flight is dangerous. You don't go, it'll probably be okay. Which, you know, is how you can end up with something like Apollo 13. There were signs leading up to the launch that they should have postponed and fixed some things, but they said, you know, well, this looks like this should work. We're confident in that. And by missing a few key things, you know, they didn't get to land on the moon, and thank goodness they made it back alive. And then of course, you know, created a great movie years later. But yeah, I mean, these are things that the tolerance, in my opinion, has to be quite strict for go, no go.
Yeah, that looks like we're about maybe 3 or 4 minutes away from SpaceX making their determination on what's known as the field mill rule. Of course, Florida being the lightning capital of North America, if not the world, means that there is a fair amount of electricity in the atmosphere that could, of course, cause problems. Not sure off the top of my head. I'm sure you've got this info. I believe one of the Apollo launches was hit by lightning.
Yes. So that was Apollo 12. It was hit twice. And this is where steely-eyed missile man John Aaron comes into play. Apollo 12 was struck twice on launch. The lightning hit the tip and went and rode the exhaust all the way down to the ground. Wow. And there are some fantastic pictures of that. I highly recommend Googling those. And everything went haywire. And they were looking at calling it abort. And they would have, except that John Aaron, the ECOM, was very curious by nature. And so he had noticed a pattern like a year before, and he had never seen the pattern before in his telemetry. And so he wanted to know how to fix it. And so he found out. And so when this pattern popped up, he immediately recognized it and was able to tell them to flip SCE to AUX. And so that phrase is very popular amongst spaceflight nerds. Something goes wrong, I'll flip FCE to AUX. And so they did that and everything went back to normal. And Pete Conrad laughed his way into orbit. Nervous laughter the entire way.
Oh, nervous laughter. Very important.
Yeah, nervous laughter. Yeah. Also, there's in the recordings, if you listen to them, they say, they want you to flip SCE to AUX, to auxiliary. And you hear them go, where the hell is that? Because nobody ever flips that switch. This is an obscure switch that was over the left shoulder of the middle C. So, of course, the first time I jump in an Apollo trainer, that's the first thing I look for. It's the first thing that everybody goes to look for, I think, if you know the Apollo 12 story. And yes, I flipped it to AUX.
Okay, that was going to be my follow-up question, but yeah. So we are looking for an update, probably 2 to 3 minutes at this point. And again, because this is an instantaneous launch window, because we have a limited amount of propellant. As big and incredible as a rocket is, there's still a limit to the amount of propellant you can have in it. And of course, we have an International Space Station that is roughly the size of a football stadium, but it's also several hundred miles above the Earth, and it's moving 17,500 miles per hour. So let's try to get these two to line up appropriately. You're off by a couple of seconds. You may not have the propellant to be able to get you into the right place, which of course I think brings us in the 2 minutes we probably have right now before we get a go or no go. Actually, right about 35 seconds. This is a built-in T-20 is when we're going to get the weather update. Is the destination for Crew Dragon is our friendly space station up there in orbit, the ISS. And so we'll see what we can do here. All right, let's bring up a new program. This is called NASA's Eyes on Earth. And so this gives us the opportunity to spend some time looking at the ISS. So as you can see, a very, very big structure. We've had it in space now for 25 years. It's been a good long time that we've had it up here in space. And just kind of want to make a very important point. It is this connector point right here in the middle. That is the Harmony point on the front of the space station. That is where Crew Dragon will eventually dock with the space station. Mm-hmm. And so now I think we have 38, almost 4,000 square feet that orbits above our heads once every 90 minutes. So really impressive. And we are a scrub. So unfortunately, we will not be launching Demo-2 today.
Yeah.
So
well, I'm disappointed, of course. I will say I'm also relieved. The last thing I want to see happen is a setback that includes a catastrophic and deadly failure. So correct. I would much rather the crew be safe and us try again like I'm the one launching them. It's like with sports, same thing with spacecraft, hold up. The fun of Twitter at this point, it may be scrubbed, but we don't know yet. Someone is saying, unless you can give us another 10 minutes, we're not going to go today. So it's a scrub. It is a scrub in the box, but it could also be a scrub, not a scrub out of the box. I think we're at Schrodinger scrub right now. Okay. 4 minutes from the next weather update. Oh, that was 3 minutes ago. Okay. It's very slowly. I think I've got a delay update.
Yeah. So it's a scrubbish. We're scrub-esque right now. So just to give everybody an update, if it is a scrub, the next launch attempt is 3:22 on Saturday. And Anna, do you think we should try to do this again? Maybe not for 2 hours, but we can probably talk for another 35 or 40 minutes about this.
I can talk about human spaceflight all day long, Michael.
Hours
so
and
you just tell me when to be there, and I'll be there.
The thing is that the farther we push this.
Thanks to everybody in the chat who said they'd be happy to listen.
Look at that. So. This is what we wanted it to be. We wanted to have a good time with this. Is that the farther back we push this, the earlier in the day it will be Eastern time, which means that Anna will be less likely to. She's not going to fall asleep, of course, but it is also 10:15 in Berlin right now.
Yeah, I mean, I have had insomnia for the last few weeks, so the chances of me being awake would be better than not. But like I said, also for this, I would wake back up. I would stay up even if I was sleeping like a normal human being.
8 cups of coffee later. And so as tension is relieved around the entire world, it is official. It is a scrub. We will resume the try to get a crew from American soil to the International Space Station Saturday, let's see, it's the 20th, May 30th, 3:22 Eastern time. That's going to be 7:22 Universal, 9:22 Berlin, and 12:22 on the Pacific Coast. So I think, what do we do now with the scrub? Do we just like, hey, it's a scrub, guys. That means all of this work, we're just gonna shut it off right now and go from there. But I think what Anna and I are gonna do are we're gonna figure out what our Saturday schedules look like, and we'll figure out our next event, because we're one way or the other going to see this thing into space. Whether or not we have anything to actually do with it, we're going to have some fun, and we want to be there and be there along all of you with it as well. So with that, I think we can officially call our first foray into live streaming analysis of space flights. We'll call it a success. We were successful. Clearly the scrub was not.
No, nor was my good camera.
So we're gonna hope for a good camera and a better launch condition on Saturday. At last check, the go no go was 40% for no go on Saturday. So let's hope that those conditions continue to improve, and we see a launch in the afternoon. But until then, I'm Mike McConville. This you have to speak so that people can see you.
And I'm Adam Green.
And it was a pleasure having you with us this afternoon for first Dome Dialogues live stream. We'll do it again. We'll try it again on Saturday. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.